Hello and welcome to Deaf Awareness Week. A framing change because the signing portion is over because I'm not fluent enough yet. But last week I passed my introduction to BSL exam, yay! You can go and watch me actually do that up here. This week is Deaf Awareness Week and there are so many things to be aware about when it comes to deafness. So this year I've decided I'm just going to cover the basics. I'm going to start with something that's caused quite the controversy in the deaf community recently, and that is you cannot simulate deafness just by turning down the volume or turning it off. I, as a deaf person, see lots and lots of videos, often made by hearing people, where they just turn the volume down and they're like, this is what it's like to be deaf. But the way deafness works is, okay, yes, everything generally is kind of quieter, but there are many different types of hearing loss and different patterns of hearing loss that affect different frequencies or different pitches differently. So I can hear really high-pitched things surprisingly well, but everything sort of middle and low is much lower. There are people who can only hear low frequencies, there are people that can only hear high frequencies, and there are people that have a cookie bite hearing loss where the middle frequencies are harder to hear than the higher and the lower ones. You can't simulate that just by turning down the volume. Lip reading challenges and no audio challenges are just kind of an insult to deaf people because it is so much more than that, and posting those videos just shows that you don't have an awareness of what deafness is. Deaf Awareness Week is where deaf people come to talk about their deafness and raise awareness of actual deafness and how it affects us. This week is not for hearing people to preach what they think deafness is, with these reduced volume or no volume lip reading challenges and simulations. The next thing I want you to know about deafness is we are a spectrum and lots of us have residual hearing. One thing that I noticed when I first started using the label deaf is that people would say, but you just heard what I said. I'm like, well, I heard that you were talking and I figured out what you said because lip reading and hearing aids, etc, etc. But I do have some residual hearing, so I will hear some things. Most of us have residual hearing, so we will hear things if they are loud enough. Even people who are profoundly deaf may have some residual hearing, so they may hear things that are loud enough. And this sort of ties back into the lip reading challenges. When you turn all of the volume off, that's not a representation of deafness as a whole. There is no one way in one video to represent all types of deafness, but the vast majority of us do have some residual hearing. And that residual hearing helps us to sort of get through the world, and it might determine how we communicate things or how we understand verbal communication. So for example, I have quite a lot of residual hearing, so I will hear maybe about a third of what you actually say, and then another third I will get given by my hearing aids, and then the other third I will have to lip read or pick up from context clues. Some people with minimal residual hearing might prefer to use British Sign Language, sign-supported English, written communication, cued speech, a lip speaker, many other things. Things like being able to hear an alarm clock or not don't dictate your deafness and your place in the deaf community. If you're deaf, you are deaf. And as my jumper says, there is no right or wrong way of being deaf. Deafness is absolutely a spectrum. And I think that's the one thing that I want people to be the most aware of is, if I'm telling you that I'm deaf, that doesn't mean that I can hear absolutely nothing ever. Which brings me on to my next point. Identity labels are not diagnoses. What do I mean by that? I mean using identity labels as functioning labels or identity labels that signify your exact hearing loss. For example, the phrase, oh no, you're not deaf, you're hard of hearing because you have residual hearing. Most of us, as I've said, have residual hearing, but that doesn't make most of us hard of hearing. The labels hard of hearing, deaf with a little d, big D deaf, deafened, they are not they're not tied to specific levels of hearing loss. Everybody along that spectrum can use the word deaf to identify themselves. Everybody along that spectrum can use hard of hearing to determine themselves. The idea of saying, oh, but you only have a moderate hearing loss, so you must be hard of hearing, is complete nonsense. And these labels aren't dictated by whether or not you use hearing aids, which you can't see because of my quarantine hair, or whether you use a cochlear implant, whether you prefer to sign rather than speak, or whether you prefer to speak rather than sign. They are not a reflection of how well you pass as hearing, whether you have hearing privilege. They are absolutely not based on that. They are based on the fact that you belong in the community of people that have hearing loss. So if you prefer to use the term deaf, use the term deaf. If you prefer to use hard of hearing, use hard of hearing. Gatekeeping these labels is just excluding people from a community in which they belong. And hearing people absolutely do not get a say on this. Even other deaf people don't get a say in it. Two people with the same type of hearing loss and exactly the same level, which doesn't really happen, but two people with very similar deafnesses, one might prefer hard of hearing and one might prefer deaf. There are people on the mild end of the spectrum that prefer deaf, and there are people on the profound end that prefer hard of hearing. They are not tied to how well we hear. The only thing identity labels are tied to is our own personal preference. The next thing I want to talk about is the fact that hearing aids and cochlear implants and other hearing related devices do not cure our hearing loss. They do not magically make us hearing. They do not fix all of the problems. All hearing aids do is amplify the sound. There is a lot of work that we as deaf people who use these devices need to do to make conversation work. For example, my hearing aids, they help me hear my S sounds, my F sounds, my TH sounds, and I still have to process those in addition to all of the other sounds, because my hearing with my hearing aids in and with them out are vastly different, and I have to adapt the way my brain processes sounds when I have them in or out. It's a lot of brain work, and they don't give me 100% of the words. They boost me up to perhaps half of the words, and I still have to use my context skills and my lip reading skills and additional sign skills to get by in a conversation and to fully understand what's being said to me. They also make me actually hear my own voice, so I feel like I speak clearer, but I'm not actually sure. Similarly with cochlear implants, I don't have a cochlear implant, I'm just going on what people say, but when people have cochlear implants, they still have to learn how to process the sound. They have to learn to match what they're now hearing to what they understand visually. So they still have to lip read a lot, especially in the beginning, and they have to learn what the sounds mean. And it's not clear speech either. I also can't speak for cochlear implants on this, but with my hearing aids, they only amplify like some of the sounds and the sound that they recognise as speech. So it's not just giving me perfect hearing, it's giving me just boosts of parts of words. It's really hard to describe. The next thing that people need to be aware of about deafness is we all communicate differently. So, for example, for the most part, I speak. I am oral deaf for now. I am learning to sign, more up here, but I do speak for the most part, and I kind of need people to speak to me, because if they sign to me, I probably won't understand a lot of it because I'm not fluent in the language yet. That's just my preference where I am right now in my hearing loss. Other deaf people might prefer BSL, some deaf people prefer SSE, some people prefer just to be, just for you to write things down, some people prefer gestures, some people need interpreters or lip speakers. We all communicate differently, and a lot of the time it really depends on the environment. So for example, in loud places I might prefer you to sign or write things down to me rather than just try and speak at me. But in a quiet place you can just speak to me normally probably, and I will lip read you, and if I need that to change, I will let you know. When meeting a deaf person, it's absolutely okay to ask, how can we communicate with you? How can we communicate better? Is there anything you need me to do so that you can hear me better or so you can understand me better? So would you like me to face the other way? I know I need to face you, but is the lighting okay? Would you like me to write things down instead? I can't speak for all deaf people, and I also can't give you an exhaustive list, but I have made a video about ways you can talk to deaf people if you don't sign. But that is not an excuse to not learn any sign language at all. The last thing that I want people to be aware of when it comes to deafness is the deaf community is a very broad and diverse place. It doesn't just include deaf people, it includes hard of hearing people, even though I've already said that they count as deaf. But there is often confusion whether the deaf community does include people who prefer the label hard of hearing, and yes, it absolutely does. It also includes deaf-blind people, me. It also includes people with audio processing disorder, although that is debated on whether people with audio processing disorder can call themselves deaf, but you're still welcome in the deaf community because a lot of the time the coping strategies that you use and the skills that you have to understand the world are very similar to us, and we can all relate to each other in some way. The deaf community is not just one type of deafness, and we can all exist together in one community. And that doesn't mean that there are not communities within the community. There absolutely is. And I think my biggest takeaway from the deaf community being broad is absolutely don't forget about deaf-blind people. We are not some weird anomaly that just exists outside of deafness and visual impairment and blindness and are our own entity. We belong in each of these communities and we have our own community together. So when you talk about deafness, make sure that you are including those who are deaf-blind, and when you talk about blindness and visual impairment, please remember to include deaf-blind people there as well. So those are the 6 things I really wanted you to be aware of when it comes to deafness. I really hope that you have learned something this Deaf Awareness Week, and follow lots of deaf creators on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook pages and the like. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment down below with anything that I've opened your mind to or anything you want to know more about. Subscribe to my channel for more videos about deafness, deaf-blindness, hearing loss, sign language, chronic illness, etc. And ring that notification bell so you get notified every single time I post a new video. Videos go up every Saturday at 6 PM UK time with at least one bonus video every single month. Happy Deaf Awareness Week! See ya!